Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Despite all the times Harry and Ron drove Hermione up the wall, one thing is absolutely clear. They wouldn't have made it without her. And to be completely honest, without Hermione, there would be no Harry Potter, or even Harry himself. Without her intelligence, determination, and practical savvy, the story could have ended right in the Philosopher's Stone. Today we're going to explore why Hermione Granger was the glue that held the Golden Trio together. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Strong but not flawless, Hermione's weaknesses. To truly understand the magnitude of her role, we must first admit Hermione wasn't perfect. Her obsession with rules and fear of disorder sometimes got in the way. Her arrogance toward underachievers like Ron often caused tension. And at times, she overlooked emotions in favor of logic. But this is exactly what made her a real character, not a caricature. She grew, she learned from her mistakes, and by the end, she was not only the smartest but the most reliable of the trio. Her flaws forged her strength and gave us a character without whom the magical world might not have survived. Number 2. The road to the Philosopher's Stone. In the Philosopher's Stone, it was Hermione who gave the Golden Trio their first real edge. While Ron was playing wizard chess and Harry was chasing snitches, Hermione was poring over books for hours. She was the first to discover Nicholas Flamel and the truth about the stone. When faced with Devil's Snare, although she hesitated, she was the first to remember that the plant feared fire. If Harry and Ron had been alone, they likely wouldn't have made it. And of course, the logic puzzle with the potions, the scene that was cut from the movie, Hermione solved it on her own, a challenge that would have completely stopped Harry in his tracks. Number 3. The Basilisk and the Chamber of Secrets. In her second year, Hermione didn't even need to be conscious to save the day. She figured out that the monster was a basilisk and how it was moving through the castle's plumbing. When her petrified body was found clutching a torn page and the word pipes, she had already passed along the key to ending the threat. Without that clue, Harry and Ron might never have found the chamber's entrance, and Voldemort, in the form of young Tom Riddle, might have returned far earlier than expected. Number 4. The Triwizard Tournament. When Harry was forced into the tournament, he was seriously lacking in experience, knowledge, and support. It was Hermione who practiced spells with him, including the famous Accio, without which he wouldn't have retrieved his broom in the first task. She literally lost sleep helping him master everything in time. She also stood by him when Ron turned his back on Harry, offering the emotional support that may have saved him from breaking down completely. Number 5. The Time Turner. Hermione was the only student trusted with a time turner, all so she could attend extra classes. But in The Prisoner of Azkaban, this artifact became the key to saving 2 vital characters, Buckbeak and Sirius Black. Without Hermione's flawless academic record and ability to keep secrets, the Time Turner would never have been entrusted to her, and Sirius, Harry's only living relative, would have remained in Azkaban forever. Number 6. Dumbledore's Army. The idea of forming a secret group to study real defensive magic didn't come from Harry. It came from Hermione. She not only convinced Harry to become their teacher, but also created the enchanted coin system to keep everyone connected. Dumbledore's army became the core of resistance at Hogwarts, and without it, who knows how quickly Umbridge would have seized control. Number 7. The Battle for the Deathly Hallows. In the Deathly Hallows, Hermione rose to a whole new level. She foresaw the attack on the wedding and prepared an enchanted bag filled with a tent, food, books, and essentials. She cast protective enchantments and concealed their location from the Death Eaters. Her magical preparedness saved the group day after day. She erased herself from her parents' memories to protect them. She disfigured Harry's face to keep him from being recognized. She endured torture at Bellatrix's hands and didn't say a word. But most importantly, she remained rational when Harry began to lose himself chasing the Hallows. Dumbledore knew exactly why she had to be the one to guide him. steady him, and keep him focused on what truly mattered. Number 8. The library was her secret weapon. While Harry chased Snape across corridors and Ron obsessed over Quidditch scores, Hermione was in the library. She searched, she read, she pieced things together. In their first year, it was Hermione who found the name Nicholas Flamel in an old book. "I checked this out weeks ago for a bit of light reading," she said, slamming the answer down on the table. And just like that, the mystery of the Philosopher's Stone began to unravel, not by luck, but by learning. Years later, when Dumbledore showed Harry the first Horcrux, it was Hermione who truly understood what they were up against. While Ron panicked and Harry followed hunches, she studied every clue. "A Horcrux is an object in which a dark wizard has hidden a fragment of his soul," she explained. Having found the definition, no one else could. She even discovered how to destroy them using basilisk venom or the sword of Gryffindor. That knowledge wasn't in the open. She hunted it down. Her research didn't just support the mission, it made it possible. Number 9, the voice of logic and reason. In their first year, Harry and Ron decided to sneak out to duel Draco Malfoy. It was past curfew. They had no plan, no backup, just the thrill of doing something daring. Hermione tried to stop them. "You'll get Gryffindor into trouble again," she warned. They ignored her and almost got eaten by a troll. Time and time again, Hermione's voice cut through their recklessness. She asked the questions they didn't. She spotted traps, sensed lies, and reminded them that bravery without thought was just another form of danger. Even in darker times, she stayed sharp. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry wanted to charge into Godric's Hollow without preparation, Hermione hesitated. "We should think it through," she said. "What if it's a trap?" And she was right. Bathilda Bagshot wasn't real. Nagini was waiting. Hermione's caution saved them both from a fatal ambush. She wasn't the loudest or the boldest, but her logic, her calm, and her refusal to act without thinking often meant the difference between life and death. Number 10. Defending house elves and teaching compassion. In 4th year, Hermione stormed into the Gryffindor common room holding a stack of pamphlets. "I've started SPW," she announced, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. Ron snorted. Harry tried not to laugh. To them it seemed like one of her odd little projects, sweet but pointless. But Hermione didn't care. She knitted hats, she wrote speeches, she begged students to sign her petition because she saw something her friends didn't yet understand. Oppression doesn't stop being wrong just because it's normal. When Dobby died in Deathly Hallows, something shifted in Harry. He dug the grave by hand. No magic, no shortcuts, just raw, honest labor. "Here lies Dobby, a free elf," he carved into the stone. It wasn't just grief, it was respect. A kind of respect Hermione had been trying to teach him for years. She had fought for house elves when no one else did. And now, in death, Dobby received the dignity he had always deserved, because Hermione had planted that seed in Harry's heart. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts began, Kreacher, the once bitter house elf, was leading others into the fight. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because people like Hermione refused to turn away. She saw the ignored, the mistreated, the invisible, and reminded her friends that their war wasn't just against Voldemort. It was against cruelty itself. Without her, they might have won the battle, but lost the meaning behind it. Number 11. Courage to break the rules. Everyone thought Hermione followed every rule, and she did, until the rules became wrong. In 2nd year, she brewed Polyjuice Potion in a bathroom. "I'm going to tell you it's extremely complicated," she warned Ron and Harry, "and dangerous." But she did it anyway, because someone was attacking students and the adults were failing. Breaking the law wasn't a thrill for her. It was a burden she chose to carry when no one else would. In 3rd year, she didn't just attend extra classes. She bent time itself to save lives. And when the moment came, when Sirius Black was locked in the tower, it was Hermione who led the escape. She flew on Buckbeak, wand ready, eyes sharp. not because she trusted Sirius, but because she believed in justice. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Dumbledore hints at it. You must not be seen. Hermione nodded, already prepared to risk it all. That wasn't the act of a rule follower, that was the heart of a revolutionary. Her boldest move came in 5th year. Umbridge ruled Hogwarts with cruelty, banning spells, silencing dissent. Hermione didn't just complain, she built a resistance. "We need a teacher," she told Harry, "someone who's faced Voldemort and lived." She created Dumbledore's army, she charmed the coins, she found the room of requirement, she made them ready for war long before anyone else admitted it was coming. And she did it knowing the cost: detention, expulsion, worse. But she never hesitated. Hermione taught them that rules weren't sacred, people were, truth was, justice was. And when the system failed, you didn't wait, you acted. She didn't rebel out of pride or anger. She broke the rules with purpose, with thought, with courage. And in doing so, she showed Harry and Ron that real strength meant knowing when to say no, even to authority, even to tradition, even to everything you've been taught. Number 12, emotional support and inner stability. In the tent, the silence was suffocating. Ron had left. The Horcrux had poisoned his heart, filled him with bitterness and jealousy. Harry stared into the fire, numb and silent. But Hermione didn't break. She sat beside him, quiet, hurting, but steady. She didn't cry in front of him. She didn't blame Ron. When Harry whispered, "He's gone," Hermione only nodded. "He'll come back," she said, though she wasn't sure herself. Her voice was soft but firm. That was her gift, holding others up when they couldn't stand alone. When Harry doubted Dumbledore, when the wand from the grave made him question everything, it was Hermione who kept him grounded. "He loved you," she said, her voice sharp with certainty. "You don't know what he was doing. He trusted you, Harry." In Deathly Hallows, that moment changed everything. Hermione refused to let Harry drown in guilt or grief. She reminded him of who he was when he could no longer see it for himself. Ron, too, leaned on her more than he would ever admit. His insecurities about being overshadowed by Harry, by his brothers, by everything, ran deep. And yet it was Hermione's faith in him that kept him afloat. She defended him, challenged him, saw potential in him when he couldn't. When he returned after destroying the Horcrux, it was Hermione's anger that masked her relief. She punched his chest, tears in her eyes. You complete arse, Ronald Weasley!" But behind the rage was love. She'd waited for him. She'd never stopped believing. Hermione was more than a friend. She was a stabilizer, the quiet force in a world of chaos. When everything else cracked, she didn't. She stayed calm. She made plans. She held Harry and Ron together like thread through the eye of a needle. And in the darkest moments, it was her strength, not just her spells, that saved them. Number 13, unshakable strength and self-sacrifice. In Malfoy Manor, Hermione Granger was dragged across the floor, bleeding and trembling, yet she refused to scream her friends' names. Bellatrix Lestrange carved the word mudblood into her skin with a dagger-like fury, demanding answers, but Hermione, broken and crying, gave her nothing. "She was trying to get it out of me," Hermione later whispered, still shaking, "but I didn't say anything." Deathly Hallows. That moment wasn't just bravery, it was defiance under torture. Not magical power, not cleverness, just raw, unwavering courage. But Hermione's strength showed long before that. In a quiet house in the Muggle world, she pointed her wand at her parents and whispered a spell that erased every memory of their daughter. Her voice was steady, her eyes full of silent grief. She had to protect them, Harry realized later. She chose to live without them, knowing she might never get them back. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She simply acted, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was right. That's a different kind of bravery, one that doesn't wear armor. She never asked to be a hero. She didn't crave the spotlight. While Harry fought dragons and dark lords, Hermione fought quieter battles against fear, against loss, against the temptation to walk away. In every desperate decision she stayed. In every hopeless night she planned. When Harry collapsed under the weight of Voldemort's shadow, it was Hermione who lifted him, not with magic, but with presence. She didn't need prophecy. She chose to fight. Hermione wasn't the loudest, the fastest, or the most celebrated, but she was the most constant. The trio didn't survive because Harry was the chosen one. They survived because Hermione never left. Her courage didn't flash, it burned slow, silent, unshakable, and in the end, it was her fire that carried them through. Number 14. Building a Bridge to Luna Lovegood. When Luna Lovegood first appeared in Order of the Phoenix, she was met with raised eyebrows and awkward glances. Harry found her odd. Ron called her loony. Her dreamy voice, radish earrings, and belief in creatures like Nargles set her apart from everyone else at Hogwarts. Yet, it was Hermione, known for her strict logic and deep respect for facts, who never encouraged cruelty or mockery toward Luna. While she didn't believe in Luna's strange ideas, she made sure Harry and Ron treated her with basic respect. It was a quiet moment of leadership. Hermione didn't have to fight or shout. She simply refused to join in the laughter. That choice mattered. Later, when few were brave enough to stand beside Harry, Luna did. She fought in the Department of Mysteries. She was there at the Battle of the Astronomy Tower. She returned to Hogwarts to lead Dumbledore's army with Neville Longbottom when it was dangerous just to whisper Harry's name. Hermione saw past Luna's eccentric nature long before the others did. She saw her kindness, her quiet courage, and because of that, Luna became part of their world. Without her, the final resistance would have lost one of its most loyal hearts. One small scene proves this better than any speech. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry was struggling with fame and whispers after Slughorn's Christmas party, it was Luna who comforted him. "People expect you to have cooler friends than us," she said gently. "You are cool," Harry replied, surprised by his own honesty. That moment of connection would never have happened if Luna had been pushed away, and it was Hermione's quiet influence that made space for it to exist. She had taught her friends, without preaching, that being different isn't a weakness, it's just another kind of strength. Ron, who once dismissed Luna, later stood shoulder to shoulder with her in the Battle of Hogwarts. Harry, who hesitated to invite her in, grew to rely on her unwavering faith in him. Luna never stopped believing in things others couldn't see, and Hermione, who didn't share those beliefs, never once mocked them. Instead, she helped her friends see the value of loyalty, imagination, and acceptance. In a war where monsters wore many faces, the courage to be kind became its own kind of magic. Number 15. Infiltrating the Ministry of Magic. In the shadowed halls of the Ministry of Magic, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger found themselves on the edge of catastrophe, standing against the most powerful institution in the wizarding world while wearing stolen faces and holding nothing but courage, luck, and Hermione's unmatched intellect. The mission to steal the Horcrux from Dolores Umbridge wasn't just reckless, it was suicidal in nature, but amid the chaos, paranoia, and swirling magic of that dark building, it was Hermione Granger who held the operation together like a linchpin, without whom neither Harry nor Ron would have made it out alive. The very act of breaking into the ministry was born of desperation, but it was executed with precision, and that precision had a name, Hermione Jean Granger. It was Hermione who first realized that the Horcrux locket was no longer in the vault or in any hidden compartment, but worn brazenly around the neck of one of the most dangerous figures in magical law enforcement. While Harry burned with the fire of mission and Ron paced with dread, Hermione calmly laid out a strategy that was equal parts clever, daring, and efficient. "We'll have to polyjuice ourselves," she had said, already gathering hairs, vials, and ingredients with surgical precision. The target was Mafalda Hopkirk, a seemingly unimportant ministry employee, but one with just enough access to help them navigate the ministry's entrails without raising suspicion. Hermione followed her into the public restroom, stunned her, and extracted what was needed, all without a tremble in her wand hand. The very idea of using Polyjuice Potion for such a mission wasn't novel, but the difficulty lay in its brewing. It wasn't something one could purchase or whip up casually in a teacup. It required weeks of preparation, complex ingredients, and precise timing. Hermione, of course, had thought ahead. She'd started the potion long before they had even confirmed their plan, hedging her bets that the opportunity would arise. Without her forethought, they would have stood at the ministry's door, helpless, naked of disguise, and caught within minutes. Ron would never have brewed that potion in time. Harry didn't even consider the need until it was ready. Only Hermione foresaw everything. When they finally entered the ministry under false appearances, Ron as Reginald Cattermole, Harry as Albert Runcorn, and Hermione as Mafalda Hopkirk, the walls of the institution closed around them like a tomb. Confusion reigned, elevators clanged, papers flew, and terror pulsed through their every step. But it was Hermione who remembered her ministry layout, who guided them through the labyrinth of desks, spells, and authoritarian order. Harry nearly blew his cover multiple times, forgetting names and titles. Ron was barely holding up his role, nervous and jittery, but Hermione played Mafalda with grim believability, never cracking even as they descended into the horrors of Umbridge's office. When Umbridge questioned Muggleborns with grotesque delight, it was Hermione who acted. She produced the locket, yes, the very Horcrux itself, shining on Umbridge's chest like a cursed prize. At the moment when action had to replace strategy, it was again Hermione who stood firm. With a flick of her wand, she initiated the spellwork that would change the course of that day. She must have stolen it from someone, perhaps from Sirius's house, Hermione later told Harry in a whisper, and she was right. Her mind worked not just in tactics, but in understanding patterns and histories that others ignored. As the situation rapidly unraveled, chaos erupting like fire in dry grass, Hermione's brilliance turned from planning to survival. Alarms rang, disguises faltered, the very air grew suspicious, but Hermione kept her mind sharp and heart cold. It was she who stupefied Umbridge, snatched the Horcrux from her unconscious body, and dragged Harry and Ron toward the lift as confusion spread across the building. Where Ron froze, Hermione moved. Where Harry doubted, Hermione spelled. The mission was becoming unhinged, but Hermione refused to let it fall apart. Harry had tried to keep his head, but in a moment of recklessness, he cast a stinging hex on a Death Eater, drawing attention. The chaos multiplied. It was Hermione, always Hermione, who turned the spell back on a witness, who modified memories when needed, and who threw up defensive enchantments when the chase began. Her instinct wasn't just to attack, it was to adapt, to survive, and to preserve. They weren't just escaping a building, they were escaping a system that wanted them dead or imprisoned, and that required more than courage. It required intellect under pressure. Hermione had that in spades. When they reached the exit, chased by ministry guards and dark magic, Ron faltered again, his polyjuice form beginning to distort, threatening exposure. Hermione, without missing a beat, conjured a disillusionment charm around them and whisked them toward the fireplace. It was only because of her knowledge of the Flu network and the ministry's internal communications that they even knew which way to turn. In that critical moment, Ron panicked. Harry shouted, but Hermione acted. She blasted through a corridor with Reducto shielding the group, guiding them forward as spellfire rained down around them. And then came the worst, the splinching. Ron, caught mid-apparition during their escape from the ministry's fireplace, had his arm violently torn. It was Hermione again who kept her head, who tore into the beaded bag, who retrieved dittany and cloth, who bound his wound with quick, precise hands. Blood was everywhere. Ron was groaning in agony. Harry looked helpless, but Hermione was solid, focused, practical. She wasn't just a healer in that moment. She was a leader. They had just fled the Ministry, stolen the Horcrux, nearly been captured, and yet it was Hermione who didn't break. Number 16. Preparing for the Battle of Hogwarts. Ron was trembling as they stepped into the room of requirement for the last time, and Harry's wand hand was slick with sweat. But it wasn't either of them who had planned their return to Hogwarts. It was Hermione Granger, still clutching her magically expanded handbag and moving with precise urgency. She was the one who had insisted they search for the final Horcrux, in the place they had once called home, even when the odds were impossible. From the very start of their journey, it had been Hermione guiding the trio, not just with knowledge, but with the strength to act on it. She had read every book she could find, committed spells to memory, mastered defensive enchantments and non-verbal incantations, and done it all with the knowledge that the world was crumbling around her. The boys often relied on instinct and luck. Hermione, on the other hand, operated with deliberate purpose. During the chaos at Gringotts, she had been the one to polyjuice herself into Bellatrix Lestrange, a move that could have easily gone wrong. It had been her planning, her courage, and her fierce intellect that saw them through it. That pattern carried into the Battle of Hogwarts. When Harry was consumed by the mystery of the diadem and Ron struggled to keep up with the gravity of the war, Hermione stayed clear-eyed. She had been preparing for this battle long before they returned to the castle. Her spells were ready, her resolve unshaken, her heart steadied by the responsibility she carried. And when the moment came to fight, she was already on the front lines, not with bravado, but with clarity. Inside the Chamber of Secrets, the air was still damp and heavy with the breath of the past. Ron had managed to remember how to mimic Parseltongue, a feat impressive in itself, but it was Hermione who took the basilisk fang with the calm determination of someone who knew exactly what had to be done. She didn't hesitate. She pierced the Horcrux with a surgeon's precision, knowing it could explode, could scream, could summon Voldemort's wrath directly. But she never flinched. Her hand didn't shake. This wasn't just bravery, it was the culmination of everything she had trained herself to become. Harry may have been the chosen one, but Hermione had chosen time and again to be the one who made the impossible possible. As they emerged from the chamber, her robes torn and her face streaked with grime, Hermione immediately returned to the main battlefield. She reinforced protective spells around the defenders. She led Lavender Brown to safety after Fenrir Greyback's attack. She coordinated with Professor Flitwick and Kingsley Shacklebolt to maintain the magical barrier above the school. She didn't need a title or command. People followed her because she was dependable, because in a sea of chaos, Hermione Granger was the one constant. She thought not just of destruction, but of preservation. While others fought to kill, she fought to protect. Throughout the days, in hiding before the final battle, it had been Hermione who kept them alive, literally. She had packed the essentials, prepared the spells for concealment, and even modified her parents' memories to protect them. The emotional weight of such a sacrifice would have broken most people, but Hermione carried it silently. She didn't complain when food was scarce. She didn't weep when the cold made sleep impossible. Instead, she rationed their supplies, kept their spirits from collapsing, and researched tirelessly. She was the mind behind every successful step, even when her heart was breaking. In the hours leading to the battle, when most students were evacuated, Hermione stayed. She didn't pause to consider saving herself. There was no debate. She knew what was at stake, and she chose to stand with Harry and Ron, not out of obligation, but because her entire life had built up to this choice. She understood what Harry still struggled to grasp, that victory would not come from power, but from perseverance, loyalty, and strategy. When McGonagall cast the Peer-Totem Locomotor spell and sent the suits of armor into battle, Hermione's eyes didn't widen in awe. She nodded, already evaluating the next move. During the first assault, when the Death Eaters breached the corridors, it was Hermione who disarmed 2 attackers with a single spell. Her movements were calculated, not impulsive. She knew how to disarm, shield, and strike because she had practiced. She had studied. The books she loved so much had become weapons, and she wielded them better than any blade. Even as the stone walls of Hogwarts cracked and fell, Hermione remained composed. When the trio encountered Nagini in the boathouse and watched Snape die, it was Hermione who helped drag Harry away, even as he stood stunned by grief. She never let the moment swallow her. There was too much to do. It had been Hermione who deciphered the secret behind the Deathly Hallows and the tale of the 3 brothers, understanding the symbolic significance faster than either boy. She didn't dismiss the legend as mere fairy tale. She placed it in context, layered it against the facts, and drew meaning where others saw myth. That ability to synthesize truth from chaos was the very heart of her strength. Ron had courage and Harry had destiny, but Hermione had clarity. Without her, the threads would have unraveled. When Fred Weasley died, Hermione grieved, but she didn't stop. She found George and gave him a calming potion from her satchel. When Percy howled in anguish, Hermione created a protective shield around them all. She understood that mourning could come later. Right now, she was holding the line for those who couldn't. She wasn't emotionless, she was deeply human, but she knew how to prioritize survival. She carried potions, spare wands, healing salves, everything anyone might need. She was a mobile stronghold, a lifeline in a war that consumed everything in its path. Number 17, Outsmarting Umbridge. The moment Professor Umbridge seized control of Hogwarts, everything changed. Corridors once filled with mischief and laughter turned cold and silent under her iron rule. Her oppressive decrees, pink office, and obsession with order masked a deeply authoritarian nature that sought not just to control the students, but to break them. While many feared her, none dared to challenge her with the same boldness and clarity as Hermione Granger. It was not brute strength or reckless rebellion that cracked Umbridge's control. It was the mind of a 17-year-old witch who understood that true power lies in strategy, not in wand-waving bravado. The showdown in the Forbidden Forest wasn't just a side adventure. It was the culmination of Hermione's quiet resistance, layered in logic and intuition. When Umbridge caught Harry trying to contact Sirius Black, using her fireplace and dragged him to her office, she did not expect Hermione to intervene. Yet Hermione, without hesitation, stepped forward with a calculated desperation in her voice. She crafted a lie so daring, so convincing, that it fooled even the most paranoid professor at Hogwarts. She claimed that Dumbledore had hidden a secret weapon in the Forbidden Forest, one powerful enough to destroy the Ministry itself. Hermione's fabricated story wasn't just a bluff, it was a reflection of her deep understanding of Umbridge's psychology. The promise of catching Dumbledore red-handed played directly into the professor's ambition. Harry, for all his courage, and Ron, for all his loyalty, lacked this finesse. Their usual instinct in such situations was to fight, to lash out, to face the enemy head-on. But against Umbridge that would have failed. She held institutional power and wasn't afraid to use it. A direct confrontation would have ended in detention, or worse. Hermione knew that the only way to beat a system built on control was through manipulation and misdirection. She turned Umbridge's own paranoia against her and led her straight into the arms of creatures she could never dominate. The Forbidden Forest had always been a place of legend and danger. Centaurs, those proud and wild beings, resided deep within, far from the paths students dared to tread. Hermione led Umbridge into this territory not by chance, but by design. She knew the centaurs bore no love for the Ministry. Umbridge's condescending and racist attitude toward magical creatures had long stirred resentment. By bringing her to them, Hermione wasn't just ridding Hogwarts of a tyrant, she was delivering poetic justice. As they walked into the darkening forest, the trees closing in, even Harry began to realize this was more than a spontaneous lie. This was a trap, set with precision. When the centaurs appeared, tense and alert, it was Hermione who stepped back. She allowed Umbridge to take the lead, knowing full well how the woman's pride would provoke the centaur's fury. And provoke it she did. The professor, blind to the danger, began barking orders at them, treating them as inferior beings, not realizing she had wandered into their realm where her power meant nothing. Hermione's silence during this moment was not cowardice, it was wisdom. She understood the rules of that forest better than Umbridge ever could. She did not need to lift her wand, the forest itself did the work. This was a victory not of magic but of intellect. Hermione had turned the terrain, the creatures, and her enemy's ego into her weapons. She protected Harry and Ron not by shielding them, but by removing the threat entirely. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that courage comes in many forms. It's easy to stand up to a tyrant in front of a crowd. It's harder to outwit them in silence. Hermione's plan required more than bravery. It required the foresight to predict a tyrant's downfall and the discipline to let it unfold without interference. It's impossible to imagine Harry and Ron orchestrating such a maneuver. Harry, driven by emotion and instinct, would have tried to duel Umbridge or reason with her, both of which would have failed. Ron might have followed Harry's lead, as he often did, but his anger and lack of subtlety would have only escalated the situation. They needed Hermione's calm amidst the storm. Her mind worked not just on the battlefield, but in the shadows, in the spaces where others failed to look. She didn't overpower Umbridge, she outthought her. Even in the days leading up to this confrontation, Hermione had been preparing. While Harry and Ron focused on the obvious, Dumbledore's army, secret lessons, resisting the rules, Hermione absorbed the consequences, watching Umbridge's moves like a chess master studies the board. She noticed which teachers were being pushed out, which students were being punished, how fear grew in whispers through the hallways. She wasn't the loudest voice of resistance, she was its architect. Every spell learned in the Room of Requirement was one more piece in her strategy to restore Hogwarts to the students. Her plan with the Forbidden Forest was not impulsive, it was a final, necessary act. The truth is, Hermione was never the sidekick, she was the anchor. In the face of danger, she didn't freeze. She calculated. When Sirius was imprisoned in the Department of Mysteries, she questioned Harry's assumptions. When the group entered the Ministry later that year, it was Hermione who insisted on planning their route, anticipating traps, protecting the others. Her mind was always a few steps ahead, not because she distrusted her friends, but because she understood the cost of rushing in blind. The encounter with Umbridge was just one more example of her tactical brilliance. Number 18. Willingness to endure pain. There are moments in a war that define who you are, not by how loudly you shout, but by how silently you endure. For Hermione Granger, it was not the glory of battle or the applause of success that marked her path, but the quiet, gut-wrenching choices that few could make and even fewer would survive. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Hermione does something unspeakable. She erases herself from her parents' lives, not temporarily, not metaphorically. She removes every trace, every smile, every childhood memory. She had made her parents forget that she ever existed, as the text tells us. There is no promise that these memories can be restored. There is no guarantee that she will even return. It is an action of pure selflessness, a quiet form of suicide in the name of others. Without this capacity for sacrifice, Harry and Ron would have buckled under the weight of their own fears. Hermione's presence wasn't merely convenient, it was a moral anchor. In their darkest moments, it was her ability to accept pain without complaint that held the trio together. When Ron abandoned them during the hunt for Horcruxes, it was Hermione who stayed with Harry. Not because she didn't feel pain, her quiet tears after Ron's departure were proof of that, but because she refused to let emotional collapse interrupt duty. Her loyalty wasn't reactionary, it was a decision she remade every day, regardless of how hopeless their mission became. The forest was cold. The Horcrux around Harry's neck was slowly poisoning them with dread, but Hermione, equipped with nothing but her belief in the cause and her love for her friends, refused to leave. That winter in the woods, when morale was at its lowest, it was Hermione's sacrifices that kept them moving. She read the tales of Beedle the Bard by Wandlight, trying to uncover the meaning of the deathly hallows. She stitched up wounds, conjured protections, and held her silence during arguments. Even when Harry doubted Dumbledore, even when hope flickered to embers, Hermione carried on. In Deathly Hallows, Harry notes, she was so determined to make sense of everything, to keep pushing forward. It wasn't her intelligence alone that pushed them forward. It was her emotional stamina. Without Hermione, Harry might have walked into the darkness with no compass. Ron, for all his growth, was emotionally volatile. He admitted to being jealous, scared, and overwhelmed. During the Locket Horcrux scene, we see the worst of Ron, his insecurities amplified into rage and betrayal. He leaves. Hermione does not. She's broken, yes, but she stays. This decision alone saved Harry's life. Without her, he would have been isolated and exposed, and even when Ron returns, Hermione's pain doesn't manifest as revenge or bitterness. She does not lash out. She simply continues. The strength it takes to keep loving those who've hurt you in the middle of a war is its own kind of heroism. Her bravery wasn't loud or flamboyant, it was surgical, deliberate. During their break-in at the Ministry of Magic, she transforms herself into Mafalda Hopkirk, immersing herself so completely in the danger that even Yaxley fails to see through her disguise. She stuns employees, lies convincingly to officials, and gets them in and out alive. When Harry hesitates in front of Umbridge, it's Hermione who signals him to act. She orchestrates their every move, risking capture at every step. If anyone had cracked, the trio would have been exposed. Hermione never cracked. Her understanding of sacrifice extended beyond personal cost. It was philosophical. In Philosopher's Stone, even as a first year, she reminds Harry and Ron that books and cleverness, there are more important things, friendship and bravery. And yet, ironically, it was her cleverness guided by bravery that saved them again and again. She brewed Polyjuice Potion in second year, facing possible expulsion. She trapped Rita Skeeter in a jar as a beetle, risking legal punishment. She created Dumbledore's army with Harry, knowing full well that they could all be expelled, or worse. But her greatest act of endurance wasn't magical. It was enduring the emotional toll of watching her two best friends unravel. After Dobby's death, when they arrive at Shell Cottage, Harry and Ron are numbed by guilt and grief. Hermione is too, but she still helps bury the elf. She still strategizes their next move. She still listens when Luna talks about belief. She doesn't have the luxury of falling apart. She bears the emotional burden so they can recover. Like Atlas, she holds the sky for them when they can't lift their heads. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Ron is poisoned and nearly dies, Hermione sits beside him in the hospital wing for hours. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't eat. And when Ron murmurs her name in delirium, it's not validation she seeks. It's a reminder of why she's there. Her heart isn't guarded, it bleeds openly, yet she still chooses to fight. It's this kind of endurance that Harry lacks in isolation and Ron lacks in clarity. But Hermione has both sensitivity and focus. That combination saved lives. When they infiltrated Gringotts and mounted a dragon to escape, it wasn't just physical courage that got them out. It was Hermione's sharp instinct and refusal to hesitate. She cast the Imperious Curse, something she had once called horrible, on Travers, a goblin. The ethical torment of such a spell was immense, but she did it, because sometimes, when the cause is just, even the purest souls have to wade through moral grey. Hermione's greatness was not in avoiding darkness, but in navigating it without losing herself. Her sacrifices didn't end with the war. In The Cursed Child, we see a Hermione who sacrificed personal ambition to protect the world. She remained in public service, eventually becoming Minister for Magic because she understood that victory is not a finish line but a responsibility. She kept protecting what she had once nearly died for. Her trauma didn't become bitterness. Her pain didn't evolve into cruelty. She simply carried on again and again, as she always had, without demanding applause. For Harry, Hermione was more than a friend. She was a mirror, showing him what true bravery looked like. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry doubts himself, Hermione is the one who believes in his vision enough to found Dumbledore's army. "You're a really good teacher, Harry," she says, not to flatter, but to fortify him. In those moments, Harry becomes stronger because Hermione lends him her strength. Without her, his doubt might have consumed him. Without her, Ron's insecurities might have paralyzed him. She was the emotional architecture of the trio. Even in the face of pure evil, Hermione didn't fold. At Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix Lestrange tortured her mercilessly. The screams haunted everyone. Harry later said he'd never heard such suffering. But Hermione didn't betray them. She lied, even under pain. She endured the Cruciatus curse, knowing that telling the truth would doom them all. She was 17. She could have given in, but she didn't, because loyalty for Hermione wasn't conditional, it wasn't convenient, it was absolute. Her character was forged not in the comfort of classrooms, but in the trenches of war. She never sought recognition. Her name wasn't carved on statues, but in every battle, in every narrow escape, in every plan that worked, Hermione's fingerprints are there. She was never the chosen one. She wasn't the comic relief. She was the glue. She was the conscience. And without her, Harry and Ron would not have survived, not just physically, but emotionally. So when people speak of Hermione Granger as the smart one, they miss the point entirely. She wasn't just clever, she was brave in ways few could understand. She didn't need to be loud to be powerful. She didn't need a prophecy to matter. She simply made herself essential through sacrifice, through courage, and through an unshakable commitment to the people she loved. Every great story needs a hero. But behind every hero, there's someone who quietly chooses pain so others don't have to. That was Hermione. And that is why Harry and Ron never could have made it without her. Number 19. Books that don't exist. There was something strangely inevitable about Hermione Granger's ability to pull the impossible from thin air, or rather, from forgotten pages. At every critical moment of the trio's journey, when Harry Potter's instincts clashed with Ron Weasley's emotions, it was Hermione who reached into her seemingly endless store of knowledge and emerged with answers that no other student, teacher, or even Order member could find. But the real marvel was not that she knew things, was that she knew where to look for things that didn't, by most accounts, exist at all. Books, dusty and ignored, that contained the kind of truths Hogwarts itself kept buried. Her gift wasn't just memory. It was the ability to find what the world had deliberately hidden. And nothing tested this gift more than the mystery of Horcruxes. The moment Albus Dumbledore revealed the possibility of Horcruxes, the clock began ticking. Harry, already burdened with prophecies and inner scars, was too distracted by dreams of corridors and glimpses into Voldemort's fractured soul. Ron, loyal and brave, couldn't conceptualize horror that had no face. But Hermione, she recognized that this wasn't just another term to memorize. It was the darkest magic imaginable, and it required knowledge no ordinary library could provide. The tragedy of Hogwarts was that even in its vast halls of magical learning, the most important things were always the hardest to reach. And so, while others feared what they didn't understand, Hermione went searching. No curriculum included Horcruxes. No standard defense against the dark arts textbook even hinted at their existence. Of course, there's nothing in Hogwarts. A history, she once admitted, frustration creeping into her voice, though no less determined for it. The magic of destruction, the idea that a person could divide their soul and encase it in objects, was too gruesome, too blasphemous to be discussed in classrooms. And yet, When the war demanded it, when Voldemort's shadow grew too large, Hermione somehow managed to pull the curtain aside. She uncovered whispers from Secrets of the Darkest Art, a book buried deep within the restricted section, a place even the staff avoided. It wasn't just a question of knowing it existed, it was knowing it mattered. What made Hermione irreplaceable was not the fact that she found the information, but that she understood how to apply it. Discovering the word Horcrux was only the beginning. She read, reread, and then read again, tracing every dark thread until she understood not only what they were, but how they could be undone. The phrase, "only something that is capable of destroying beyond magical repair," became her silent mantra. And so she sought basilisk venom, the sword of Gryffindor, enchanted fire. She didn't stumble upon these tools by accident. She hunted them, remembered their properties, and connected details that others would have dismissed. While Harry followed instincts and Ron followed Harry, Hermione followed the evidence. It was her mind that remembered the sword of Godric Gryffindor had absorbed basilisk venom in the Chamber of Secrets. That fact alone became the turning point of their campaign. Without that sword, without the understanding that it could destroy Horcruxes when most other things could not, the entire war effort would have fallen apart. Dumbledore might have guided Harry toward answers, but it was Hermione who made them actionable. When she and Ron pulled the sword from the lake in the Forest of Dean, it was the culmination of dozens of small decisions, all rooted in her preparation, her refusal to let chance dictate their fate. Hermione's genius did not end with research. She translated fear into strategy. It was she who insisted they keep a supply of Polyjuice potion ready. She who packed the enchanted beaded bag with items like books, clothes, potions, and even the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black, who later gave them critical information about the sword. She who kept the trio alive during the wilderness months, while Harry spiraled into dreams and Ron faltered under the weight of isolation. Every step forward was because Hermione had made plans long before the danger appeared. She planned not because she hoped for the best, but because she knew what would happen if they were unprepared. Her preparation became most evident when they entered the Ministry of Magic. That mission, reckless and suicidal by any standard, succeeded because Hermione remembered the structure of the building, disguised them with Polyjuice potion, and knew exactly what papers they'd need to forge. But even that was secondary to what came afterward, their escape. When the trio was hunted, wounded, and utterly directionless, it was Hermione who led them through the countryside, never sleeping properly, always scanning books under the dim light of magical fire, hoping for the next clue. She carried more than their supplies. She carried their future. There is a passage in Deathly Hallows that captures this spirit. Hermione was dashing between bookcases, her arms full of volumes, her face intent. She wasn't just reading, she was hunting. Her hands were not trembling with fear, but shaking from urgency. In that scene, she wasn't just the cleverest witch of her age, she was the architect of resistance. Every book she carried was a weapon, every page a battlefield. In a war waged by shadows where brute force was never enough, her intellect became the sharpest sword they had. Even the discovery of the Deathly Hallows, a mystery that had eluded magical historians for centuries, would have meant nothing if not for Hermione's skepticism. While Harry was seduced by the idea of the Elder Wand and the invisibility cloak, it was Hermione who reminded him again and again that chasing legends led to death. She grounded them, refused to let myth become a distraction, and kept their focus where it mattered, the Horcruxes. Her voice was often the only thing keeping them tethered to logic. "Hallows or Horcruxes?" she asked, and the question echoed through every decision they made thereafter. In Malfoy Manor, as they were captured and nearly killed, it was Hermione's spells that protected them. She cast protective enchantments around their camp every night. She erased her parents' memories to keep them safe, a sacrifice neither Harry nor Ron had ever contemplated for their own families. She was not only brilliant, but brave, in a way the boys never truly grasped. Her courage was silent, strategic, and absolute. She didn't rush into danger, but she faced it, knowing that survival required more than wands. It required wisdom. At every step, Hermione proved that magic was only as powerful as the knowledge behind it. She knew wandless spells, protective charms, defensive curses, but more importantly, she knew why and when to use them. When they broke into Gringotts, it was Hermione who disguised herself as Bellatrix. She learned the Death Eater's voice, mannerisms, and speech. Her performance was not just convincing, it was essential. A single mistake would have killed them all, but she never faltered. Because when it counted, she always had the answers. The tragedy of Hermione's role is that her brilliance was often invisible. Harry got the headlines, Ron got the loyalty points, but Hermione made sure the machine kept running. When Harry hesitated in front of the diadem in the room of requirement, it was Hermione's prior insight into the Founders that helped them recognize what it was. When Ron destroyed the locket and was nearly undone by the horror within, it was Hermione's earlier research that identified what the locket would try to do to its destroyer. She was the brain behind every step, not in theory, but in action. Even in the final battle, when Hogwarts itself turned into a war zone, Hermione continued working. She knew the layout of the castle, the weaknesses in its defenses, and how to exploit them. She returned to the Chamber of Secrets to retrieve basilisk fangs, not because she was told to, but because she knew they needed them. She didn't flinch at entering the place where nightmares had once roamed. She saw the task, calculated the risk, and completed it. While Harry prepared to die and Ron fought in blind rage, Hermione stayed focused. The irony is sharp. In a magical world, it was Hermione's relationship with books that shaped reality. Not the ones in syllabi or neatly stacked on common room shelves, but the ones most people pretended didn't exist. She never settled for what was taught. She demanded what was buried. Without her, the war would have dragged on until there was nothing left to save. Without her, Voldemort would never have been stopped. Not because Harry lacked power or Ron lacked heart, but because only Hermione had the knowledge to build the path forward. She was not the chosen one. She didn't have a scar or a destiny. What she had was something more elusive and more powerful, an unrelenting belief that there was a way to win if only you knew where to look. And she always looked further than anyone else ever dared. Number 20. Fighting with unforgivable curses. There was a moment in the woods not far from Malfoy Manor when everything that Hermione Granger had ever feared seemed to be coming true. Surrounded by enemies, hunted by Death Eaters and wounded in more ways than one, she stood her ground with a wand that did not tremble. The girl who once raised her hand too often in class was now the same young woman who held back death with ancient spells and silent precision. She did not scream. She did not panic. She fought. And it wasn't blind aggression, it was controlled surgical resistance. She didn't just cast spells, she executed them, because in the heart of war, magic wasn't about flair or chaos, it was about survival, and Hermione had become a master of magical survival. It's easy to look at Harry and Ron and call them brave. Of course they were, but bravery without discipline is dangerous, and in the face of unforgivable curses it is deadly. When Bellatrix Lestrange screamed her madness across the battlefield, or when Antonin Dolohov flung his silent, slashing curse, courage alone could not answer. It took calculation. It took someone who had studied more than she'd ever admitted, someone who knew not only how to disarm, but how to dismember if the moment demanded it. And while Hermione had never wanted to be a soldier, the war gave her no choice. What she became was not a warrior in title, she was a protector in practice. Unlike Ron, whose wand often flicked with desperation, Hermione's magic never betrayed her focus. Ron reacted. Hermione anticipated. During the infiltration of the Ministry, when they were forced to fight their way out of the elevator bank, it was Hermione who conjured a smokescreen before the auras could retaliate. Harry had the invisibility cloak. Ron had luck. But Hermione had foresight. Even as they ran, she was already thinking about where they would apparate to, what spells they might need when they landed, and whether their polyjuice would wear off in time. Her mind never stopped moving, not out of fear, but from responsibility. In the cafe confrontation on Tottenham Court Road, the unforgivable curses loomed close for the first time outside of school walls. Two Death Eaters lunged at them without hesitation, their eyes cold, their magic lethal. Ron froze. Harry cast Expelliarmus, with good instinct, but a limited one. It was Hermione who cast the memory charm after the fight, who ensured they wouldn't be tracked. She had to act fast, ethically grey though it was. "You can't just do that to someone's mind," Ron had said. But Hermione didn't flinch. "Yes, I can," she had replied in the book. Because she understood the stakes. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy sometimes was a weapon sharpened by necessity. When they were captured and dragged to Malfoy Manor, it was Hermione who took the worst of the pain. Bellatrix tortured her with the Cruciatus Curse, and yet Hermione held strong, not revealing the truth about the Sword of Gryffindor. Even under agony, she calculated her silences. Harry and Ron were panicking, screaming, rattling bars and sobbing through gags, but Hermione was playing a far more dangerous game, survival by mental resilience. The physical scars on her arms were deep, but her ability to think under torture was what saved all of them. Ron wept when she was rescued. Harry looked hollow, but Hermione, she was steady, bruised, but steady. When they escaped and returned to the forest, Hermione didn't ask for rest. While Ron sulked and Harry doubted himself, she took out her bag, that bottomless extension of her planning, and began to list what they still had and what they still needed. She mended her wounds, then helped with theirs. She adjusted their protections, and then she resumed research. Because the war didn't stop for trauma, and Hermione knew that better than anyone. Without her, the boys would have drowned in their own uncertainty long before Voldemort ever got to them. In the Battle of Hogwarts, while chaos erupted around them and curses filled the air like venom, Hermione moved through the battlefield with the same cold clarity she had shown since the beginning. In the Room of Requirement, when they faced the Horcrux that had taken the form of Ravenclaw's lost diadem, it was Hermione who ensured they weren't trapped by fiendfire. When Crabbe cast the wildfire spell that he himself could not control, Harry and Ron would have been engulfed, if not for Hermione's quick thinking and immediate protective barriers. She didn't yell for help, she acted, she always acted. Later that night, as the Death Eaters closed in and the body count grew, Hermione was casting shielding spells not for glory, but for the injured. "Protego Maxima!" she cried alongside Professors Flitwick and McGonagall, reinforcing the very walls of Hogwarts itself. No one told her to do it. She just knew it had to be done. Ron was busy shouting and fighting. Harry was searching for the last Horcrux, but Hermione was where she always was, in the middle of it all, holding the line. There was a moment, brief and quiet, just before the final confrontation, when she and Ron stood in front of Nagini. The monstrous snake was coiled beside Voldemort, shielded by the aura of his dark presence. They knew she had to be killed. And while Ron trembled, Hermione didn't wait for orders. She raised her wand and fought, alongside Neville in the end, but she did not step back. In that split second, her magic was not fueled by rage, but by responsibility. She wasn't the chosen one, she was the necessary one. And that necessity was never clearer than when Harry marched to his death. It was Hermione who seemed to know before Ron what Harry was planning. She didn't beg him not to go. She didn't try to stop him. She looked at him with eyes full of knowing, of mourning. She let him go, not because she didn't care, but because she respected the weight of his choice, and that perhaps was her most powerful magic of all. The ability to love and let go when it mattered most. Throughout the war, Hermione cast dozens of combat spells, many of which were never taught at Hogwarts. Stunning spells, disarming spells, defensive barriers, and yes, even some that bordered on the dark. When they broke into Gringotts and escaped on the back of a dragon, it was Hermione who cast Glisseo on the stairs, turning them into a chute and saving their lives. In tight spaces and tight corners, it was her magic that protected the trio. She didn't rely on brute force. She outthought the enemy, and that is what kept them alive. The truth is, Hermione had to do what Harry never could. She had to become dangerous, not out of cruelty, but out of obligation. She never lost her morality, but she redefined it, reshaped it under the weight of war. "We're fighting to save lives," she once said in the tent. But she didn't say that meant sparing every enemy. She understood something essential that Ron often didn't, that sometimes the spell you cast determined whether someone else would live to cast theirs tomorrow. Ron, for all his loyalty and big-hearted courage, lacked precision. He hesitated. He second-guessed. He was emotional, impulsive, vulnerable to distraction. These were not flaws in how they were human traits, but in a world where 1 second's hesitation could mean death, they were dangerous liabilities. Hermione was never cold. She was never cruel. But she was ready. She was always ready. And Harry, for all his power, for all the destiny that surrounded him, was not a strategist. He charged when he should have watched. He hoped when he should have doubted. He survived on instinct, yes, but instinct is reactive. Hermione was proactive. Harry needed her not only because she was brilliant, but because she was prepared to do the things he couldn't, the memory charms, the painful decisions, the calculations between mercy and survival. Harry cast the final curse that killed Voldemort, but Hermione cast the hundreds that got them to that moment. In the end, the unforgivable curses weren't just the ones cast by Death Eaters. The real unforgivable things were the compromises the trio had to make along the way. And Hermione bore the heaviest of them, not in her soul, but in her choices, because while Harry was the hero and Ron the heart, Hermione was the mind that held it all together. And if she ever trembled, no one ever saw. Number 21. She helped Ron become better. There was a time when Ronald Weasley was nothing more than the 6th son in a very large family, overshadowed by brothers who excelled in every possible field: Bill the head boy, Charlie the dragon tamer, Percy the prefect, and the twins who were legends even before they left school. Ron had no choice but to carve out an identity in someone else's shadow, and he might have remained there, comfortable in mediocrity and resigned to invisibility, if it hadn't been for one person: Hermione Granger. More than a friend, she was the mirror that reflected the man he could become, not the boy he was. Through years of shared battles and emotional storms, she became the one who taught Ron how to rise, how to believe in himself, and how to be better. Not by coddling him, but by challenging everything he thought he knew about the world and about himself. From the earliest days at Hogwarts, Hermione was always 2 steps ahead. While Ron mocked her obsession with rules and her relentless need to excel, it was clear that he was also watching her. He noticed how she carried herself, how she stood up to authority when it mattered, and how unafraid she was to be the smartest person in the room. Ron, who had grown up never being the best at anything, didn't quite know how to handle that. But slowly, unknowingly, he began to change under her influence. He began to try harder, to care more. When she solved the puzzle that saved them from Severus Snape's deadly logic trap in the Philosopher's Stone, it wasn't just a victory for her. Intellect. It was a moment that made Ron realize that knowledge could be as heroic as bravery. Ron's jealousy was never subtle, especially when it came to Hermione's attention. But behind the jealousy was something more vulnerable, fear that he wasn't enough, not enough for his family, not enough for the trio, and certainly not enough for Hermione. But instead of running from that fear, Hermione forced him to confront it. When she formed SPEW, Ron ridiculed it. When she prepared for exams months in advance, he rolled his eyes. But he saw her consistency, her moral drive, and her refusal to take the easy path. Over time, her stubborn integrity seeped into him, and in the most critical moments it shaped the choices he made. The boy who once made fun of house elves would later risk his life to protect the weak. When Ron abandoned Harry and Hermione in the forest during their hunt for Horcruxes, it was the culmination of years of insecurity boiling over. He was tormented by the locket, yes, but even without the dark magic, his fears were real. He imagined Hermione choosing Harry, imagined himself as the spare again, and so he fled. But what pulled him back wasn't guilt. It was Hermione, her voice, her look, her belief in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. When he returned, she didn't greet him with open arms. She screamed, she cried, she hit him. But beneath it all was love, not the romantic kind, but the kind forged in the fires of true friendship. She was furious because she expected more from him, because she knew he could be more. Throughout the series, Hermione's moral compass rarely faltered. Ron's, however, needed constant recalibration. But Hermione never stopped pointing him toward north. When she insisted that they free Buckbeak, Ron grumbled. When she persuaded Harry to teach Dumbledore's army, Ron scoffed. But again and again her choices proved right, and Ron, little by little, learned to trust her instincts, not blindly, but with the growing wisdom of someone who had finally accepted that his worth wasn't tied to being loudest or bravest, but to being thoughtful, kind, and self-aware. He didn't just fall in love with Hermione, he became a better man because of her. Even the subtle ways Hermione corrected Ron showed the depth of her care. In the Goblet of Fire, when Ron mocks Victor Crumb, Hermione doesn't just defend herself, she exposes Ron's emotional immaturity. "Next time there's a ball," she tells him coldly, "ask me before someone else does and not as a last resort." That one sentence cut through Ron's defensiveness and left him shaken. Because Hermione didn't just want him to be better for her. She wanted him to want better for himself. And moments like these, uncomfortable, painful, true, were the chisels that shaped Ron's spirit into something stronger. Hermione taught Ron that intelligence wasn't something to be mocked. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Ron tries to coast on a lucky potion to win a Quidditch match, Hermione is furious, not because he won, but because he didn't value effort over luck. Her belief in hard work and preparation was never negotiable, and her disappointment in Ron wasn't about the game, it was about the principle. And once again, he took that in. He started studying more. He became more reliable. He began to show that he could lead, not just follow. And Hermione, though she rarely praised him openly, saw every step. In moments of crisis, Hermione was Ron's moral anchor. In the Deathly Hallows, when they infiltrated the Ministry of Magic, it was Hermione who ensured that they didn't just survive, but did so with as little harm to others as possible. Ron followed her lead, learning the value of restraint and strategy. When he risked exposure by worrying about the Muggle-borns imprisoned below, it wasn't just bravery, it was empathy, sharpened and expanded by years of watching Hermione fight for those without voices. Without her, Ron's courage might have remained reactive. With her, it became purposeful. Their arguments, far from signs of incompatibility, were proof of how deeply they cared. Ron challenged Hermione's rigidity, just as she challenged his laziness. Their fights were often explosive, but always transformative. Hermione never let Ron get away with half-hearted effort. She called out his privilege, his assumptions, and his blind spots. And Ron, though stubborn, listened. He learned. He evolved. By the time the final battle approached, Ron wasn't just the comic relief. He was a warrior, a strategist, a friend who had finally become the kind of man Hermione could respect and love, not out of obligation, but because he had earned it. It's telling that Ron's greatest heroic act, rescuing Hermione from the Chamber of Secrets in the Deathly Hallows, was guided not by brute force but by intellect and heart. Faced with the task of destroying the Locket Horcrux, Ron is forced to witness visions of his worst fears, Harry and Hermione together, mocking him, telling him he's nothing. It is a nightmare sculpted from his deepest insecurities. And yet he strikes, not out of rage, but with clarity, because Hermione's belief in him had taken root. He finally believed in himself. Hermione never sought to change Ron into someone else. She wanted him to become more of who he truly was. She saw his humor not as a mask, but as a bridge to empathy. She saw his clumsiness not as failure, but as sincerity. And above all, she saw his heart, big, wounded, loyal, and decided it was worth fighting for. In doing so, she gave Ron something no one else ever had, the sense that he could be great not by imitating his brothers, but by becoming his own kind of hero. Even Harry, the boy who lived, relied on Hermione for intellectual and emotional grounding. But Ron? He relied on her for transformation. Without her, he would have remained the same insecure boy in the train compartment. With her, he became a man willing to sacrifice everything for his friends, his principles, and the woman who had shown him what it meant to stand tall. "We're with you, whatever happens," Ron once told Harry. But those words were only possible because Hermione had taught him what loyalty truly looked like. There's a quiet scene in The Half-Blood Prince when Ron lies poisoned in the hospital wing, and Hermione sits beside him, silent and shaken. She doesn't weep, she doesn't wail, but her stillness is deafening. It's the weight of years of unspoken care, of quiet battles fought in classrooms, corridors, and war zones. In that moment, you see it. The girl who never gave up on the boy who never believed in himself. Ron didn't win battles with brilliance, nor did he possess the savior's arc that Harry carried. But what he did have was growth. The kind that hurts, the kind that comes from being seen by someone who refuses to accept your lowest version. Hermione was that someone. She wasn't just a friend. She was the fire that forged him, the compass that redirected him, and the force that reminded him again and again that he was worthy, not because of what others saw in him, but because of what he learned to see in himself. Number 22, the hidden leader. When chaos descended upon the trio's journey in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it wasn't the boy who lived who held the group together, it was Hermione Granger. While Harry's name was legendary and Ron's loyalty undeniable, Hermione was the quiet commander, the one whose choices kept them alive. The brilliance of her role often went unnoticed, cloaked in the shadow of Harry's fame. Yet time and time again, when the others faltered or hesitated, Hermione stood firm. She was not simply the clever one, she was the strategist, the planner, the hidden leader without whom Harry and Ron would have never reached the endgame. In the forest, when they were fugitives, hunted by the Ministry and Voldemort alike, it was Hermione who had packed the enchanted beaded bag. She had included everything they might need: tents, clothes, books, potions, a portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black. She had even taken Polyjuice Potion and hairs from various people, anticipating any identity-masking needs. These weren't random actions, they were the result of meticulous, calculated preparation. When they were forced to flee Bill and Fleur's wedding under a rain of curses, Harry and Ron had nothing but their wands. Hermione had their world in her bag. Without it, they would have been wandering, homeless and vulnerable. The leadership was most evident when danger struck. In the Deathly Hallows, after the trio escapes the Lovegood household following Xenophilius's betrayal, it's Hermione who disapparates them. She reacts before Harry can form a plan, getting them to safety. But it wasn't just a reflex, it was knowledge. She knew they had to break the connection with the Death Eaters, that they had to land somewhere untraceable. Harry was stunned. Ron was panicking. Hermione had already acted. Leadership isn't always about issuing orders. Often it's about being the one who moves when no one else can. When they were captured by snatchers and taken to Malfoy Manor, Hermione once again played a key role, even as a prisoner. She used a non-verbal spell to disfigure Harry's face, making him unrecognizable. It was this quick thinking that delayed their identification and saved Harry from immediate death. Ron froze. Harry hesitated. Hermione cast the spell. Even in terror, even while knowing she was moments away from being tortured, she protected them. She bought them time, not just with magic, but with courage that disguised itself as intelligence. Strategic thinking wasn't her only gift. Hermione understood people in a way the others didn't. When Harry was consumed with the mission Dumbledore had left him, Hermione was the one who gently, persistently asked the hard questions. She didn't follow blindly. In Half-Blood Prince, she challenged Harry's obsession with the Half-Blood Prince's textbook, reminding him that power without caution was dangerous. In Order of the Phoenix, she was the one who encouraged the formation of Dumbledore's army, not Harry. She recognized that the students needed real instruction and that Harry had earned their trust. He only agreed after her persuasion. She saw the need before he did, and she gave him the platform to rise. When Ron abandoned them in the forest, it was Hermione who refused to crumble. Her heartbreak was private and quiet, but she never let the mission falter. Harry was lost in grief and indecision. She studied the Horcruxes, tried to interpret Dumbledore's clues, and kept them moving. There was no glory in what she did, no spotlight, no praise, but she held the mission together when it was on the verge of collapse. Leadership isn't about being fearless, it's about carrying the weight even when it hurts. She did that every day without complaint. Their escape from Gringotts was also shaped by Hermione's calculated boldness. It was her idea to use Polyjuice Potion to impersonate Bellatrix, her performance so convincing that she fooled the goblins. Even with a dragon roaring beneath the floors and alarms echoing through the vaults, Hermione remained composed. She understood that strategy required deception as much as strength. Harry charged forward, Ron improvised, but Hermione constructed the illusion that allowed them to get close to the Horcrux in the first place. Her sense of responsibility extended beyond the trio. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Buckbeak was sentenced to death, it was Hermione who studied magical law and defended the Hippogriff before the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. She didn't wait for Hagrid to ask, she acted because it was right. Later, when they used the Time Turner to rescue both Buckbeak and Sirius, it was Hermione who understood how to manipulate time without unraveling it. She planned their movements, warned Harry about the rules, and guided them through the process. Harry might have cast the Patronus, but he never would have made it to the lake without her. In Goblet of Fire, during the chaos of the Triwizard tournament, Hermione was the one who saw through Rita Skeeter's lies. She uncovered the journalist's animagus secret, something neither Harry nor Ron had even suspected, and blackmailed her into silence. It wasn't just about revenge. Hermione did it to protect Harry's public image and to stop the manipulation of vulnerable students like Luna and Neville. Her tactics were subtle, but their effects were powerful. She understood that fighting a war required more than duels. It required controlling the narrative. Throughout the series, Hermione's moral compass never wavered, but she wasn't rigid. In Chamber of Secrets, when she brewed Polyjuice Potion in a school bathroom, risking expulsion, she did it for the mission. She broke rules not for thrill, but because justice required it. When Umbridge took over Hogwarts, Hermione led Harry into the Forbidden Forest, tricking the High Inquisitor into following them to the Centaurs. It was a dangerous move, playing with magical creatures she could not control, but she calculated the risk, and it paid off. "You're brilliant, Hermione," Harry had said, wide-eyed, and she was, but more than that, she was daring when it mattered. Even in the final battle, Hermione remained calm and purposeful. She destroyed the Hufflepuff Cup with Ron after breaking into the Chamber of Secrets. It was she who remembered that basilisk fangs could destroy Horcruxes. It was she who was willing to return to that dark, haunted place to finish the task. Ron followed her. Harry didn't even know the plan. Her mind never stopped connecting the pieces. And when the trio stood at the precipice of war, she was ready, not with a wand raised, but with a path laid before them. The war against Voldemort wasn't just one with courage, it was one with precision. And precision was Hermione's domain. Her instincts were sharp, but they were backed by hours of reading, days of research, and years of observation. She wasn't guessing, she was planning. In the Ministry of Magic, when they infiltrated the building to retrieve the locket, Hermione had memorized the schedules, the structure, the spells. She impersonated Mafalda Hopkirk with flawless poise. Her knowledge wasn't just academic, it was tactical. Even her imperfections revealed her depth. When she obliviated her parents to protect them from Death Eaters, it was a quiet act of unimaginable love. She gave up everything, her family, her past, to protect them. No one asked her to. She simply did what had to be done. That's what true leaders do. They sacrifice. They carry the burdens that others cannot. Harry had his mother's protection. Ron had his family's love. Hermione had her own decisions, her own fierce will to fight for what was right, even when it left her alone. The books are filled with moments where Harry's name is spoken in awe. He is the chosen one, the boy with the lightning scar, but behind every victory Hermione's fingerprints are there, silent, undeniable, vital. She was the shield that covered their blind spots, the voice that asked the questions no one wanted to face, the force that turned intention into execution. Harry might have been the face of the resistance, but Hermione was its brain and often its soul. Leadership is not about loudness. It's about clarity in chaos. And when chaos erupted, Hermione didn't panic. She analyzed, she moved, she led. The others followed because they trusted her, not just her knowledge, but her conviction. In the Philosopher's Stone, when they faced the logic puzzle of Snape's riddle, it was Hermione who calmly solved it while the boys looked on, confused. "This isn't magic, it's logic," she said, and walked forward. She was right then, and she would be right again, many times over. It is easy to admire Harry for his bravery. It is easy to love Ron for his loyalty. But the engine that moved them forward, that pulled them through forest, fire, and fear, was Hermione Granger. Her power didn't come from prophecy. It came from choice, from discipline, from intelligence wielded with compassion. She wasn't the obvious hero, but without her, the hero's tale would have ended far too soon. Number 23. Logic over fear. There were moments in Harry Potter's journey that teetered on the edge of total disaster, moments when hesitation could have meant death, failure, or worse. In each of these critical situations, a pattern quietly emerged. When fear paralyzed others, Hermione Granger remained calm. When emotions clouded judgment, Hermione trusted logic. And when Harry and Ron stumbled in confusion, it was Hermione who often lit the path forward. Without her relentless intellect, unwavering focus, and an almost uncanny ability to think under pressure, their story would have ended far earlier and far less victoriously. In their very first year at Hogwarts, it was Hermione who saved them from certain doom in the Devil's Snare. As Ron flailed in terror and Harry tried brute force, Hermione assessed the plant's behavior. "It's Devil's Snare, you have to relax. If you don't, it'll strangle you," she instructed. Her knowledge wasn't just academic, it was practical. Even then, at 11 years old, she understood that understanding the enemy was more powerful than reacting with fear. Without her insight, they would have perished in the dark chamber beneath the trapdoor. Ron's strength and Harry's courage meant nothing without the reasoning mind that calmly told them what to do. The trio's second year underscored Hermione's role even more dramatically. The school was gripped by terror as students were being petrified. Panic spread like wildfire. Professors doubled security. Students whispered of closing the school. Even Dumbledore admitted the Chamber of Secrets has indeed been opened again. And while everyone else grew paralyzed by the unknown, Hermione methodically researched. Before being petrified herself, she clutched a torn page in her hand, the answer. Of the many fearsome beasts and monsters that roam our land, there is none more curious or more deadly than the basilisk. She had identified the monster, its method of attack, and even the role of the pipes. Her logic broke the curse that had threatened to consume the school. Harry fought the basilisk, yes, but he wouldn't have known what it was or how it moved without Hermione. Fear never clouded her mind, even in the most terrifying moments. During their 4th year, when the Yule Ball caused Ron to spiral into jealousy and Harry into silent confusion, Hermione remained composed. But it wasn't just about the ball, it was a metaphor for who they all were. Ron let emotions rule him. Harry withdrew into frustration, but Hermione, despite feeling deeply, continued to reason and act. She stood tall even when faced with public humiliation. She valued principles over panic. She prepared, practiced, and planned. When Harry faced the Triwizard tournament's deadly tasks, it was Hermione who helped him master the summoning charm that saved his life in the first task. Accio Firebolt wasn't just magic, it was preparation born from logic. 5th year brought the rise of Dolores Umbridge and the formation of Dumbledore's army. When fear infected the school and even professors seemed powerless, Hermione engineered the DA, created the enchanted coins to communicate secretly, and developed the structure of the meetings. She didn't respond to tyranny with emotion, but with action rooted in strategy. "It's sort of a secret society," she said, laying out the plan with cool clarity. It was this careful logic that gave the students a sense of power and unity. Harry may have been the leader, but Hermione was the architect. The Order of the Phoenix may have fought in the shadows, but Dumbledore's army was born in the mind of a girl who refused to be silenced. When they infiltrated the Ministry in their 6th year to retrieve the locket, it was Hermione who crafted their plan, brewed the polyjuice potion, and remembered every last detail that ensured their identities remained hidden. Even when chaos erupted and they were nearly caught, Hermione stayed sharp. Her mind, always whirring, never collapsed under pressure. Ron panicked, Harry improvised, but Hermione anticipated. She had escape routes planned and spells prepared. They survived because she never let fear take the lead. But the most powerful display of Hermione's logical mind against terror came in their 7th year, in the heart of war. When they were captured by snatchers and brought to Malfoy Manor, the situation was hopeless. Dobby was still imprisoned. Ron was locked in the cellar. Harry had been beaten. Bellatrix Lestrange, snarling and sadistic, pressed her wand against Hermione's throat and tortured her for information. And yet, somehow, Hermione misled her. She made Bellatrix believe the sword of Gryffindor was fake. She bought time with deception, detail, and psychological control, even while writhing in pain. That moment wasn't about magic or strength. It was pure logic in the face of agony. Her voice trembled, but her strategy held. The escape from Malfoy Manor wasn't led by Harry. It wasn't orchestrated by Ron. It was Hermione who disarmed Bellatrix, Hermione who freed the prisoners, Hermione who protected the group with enchantments once they reached Shell Cottage. And throughout, her mind never cracked. The fear was real, but it never ruled her. Her planning, her knowledge, her foresight, these were the spells that saved them again and again. When they broke into Gringotts, it was Hermione who disguised herself as Bellatrix with meticulous mimicry. She knew the exact behaviors, vocabulary, and spells to maintain the illusion. Ron bumbled, Harry improvised, but Hermione rehearsed. She planned for the dragon, the thief's downfall, the multiplying treasure. The goblins might have seen through Harry's lies, but they couldn't crack Hermione's performance. Every layer of the heist bore her signature: risk management, magical preparation, and acute awareness of details. Even when everything fell apart, as it often did, Hermione had backup spells, protective charms, and fast-thinking improvisation. It wasn't just bravery, it was brilliance under pressure. The Battle of Hogwarts revealed something even deeper. When Ron suggested saving the house elves in the kitchens, it was Hermione who stopped fighting and kissed him. But it wasn't romance that defined her in that moment. It was compassion fueled by principle. Even in the middle of a battle, with lives at stake, she remembered those who couldn't fight for themselves. While others saw war, she saw humanity. That's the difference between fear and logic. Fear rushes, fear forgets. Logic remembers what matters most. After the war, history would remember Harry as the chosen one. Ron would be remembered for his loyalty. But without Hermione's mind, neither boy would have survived past their first encounters with real danger, not just because she read books, but because she understood how to use what she knew. When they wandered the countryside in search of Horcruxes, it was Hermione who packed the enchanted handbag. She packed the tent, she packed the supplies, she packed the books that led them to answers. She even packed a portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black, which proved crucial in navigating their movements. She prepared for everything, not out of fear, but out of reason. Hermione never had a prophecy. She wasn't destined for greatness, but she earned it, through action, through thought. While Harry stood before Voldemort with a wand, it was Hermione who decoded the Deathly Hallows, questioned Dumbledore's intentions, and kept them grounded. Her doubts were not weakness, they were necessary. Fear begs for certainty. Logic demands evidence. She brought that balance, constantly anchoring Harry to reason when emotion tempted him toward recklessness. She didn't need to be the hero, she needed to keep the heroes alive, and she did, again and again. When others froze, Hermione moved. When others screamed, she thought. When others rushed, she calculated. Her magic wasn't flashy, it was thoughtful. Her greatest spells weren't shouted in duels, but whispered in libraries, scribbled in margins, practiced in solitude. Without her, the trio would have remained children playing at bravery. With her, they became a force that brought down the darkest wizard of all time. In the end, it was never just about courage or love or destiny. It was about thinking clearly when the world falls apart. That was Hermione Granger's true power. In a universe of fear, she chose logic. In a war of magic, she chose knowledge. And in every chapter of Harry and Ron's story, there's the quiet brilliance of a girl who refused to panic, because she knew that thinking was the strongest magic of all. Number 24, Mediator, between Harry and Ron. In the tangled web of emotions that defined Harry Potter's journey, few threads held the trio together as tightly as Hermione Granger's quiet but resolute presence. It was not merely her intelligence or spellwork that made her indispensable, it was her ability to interpret, stabilize, and mediate the often fiery and unpredictable dynamic between Harry and Ron. Without her, their friendship might not have survived the first real crisis. Her role as the emotional translator between the two boys was subtle, yet profound, keeping them from drifting apart in times of pride, jealousy, or sheer misunderstanding. When Harry's name was drawn unexpectedly from the Goblet of Fire, the emotional fallout hit the trio like a curse. Ron's resentment, burning with feelings of inferiority and suspicion, created a gaping void between him and Harry. Harry, stunned and alone, couldn't understand how his best friend could doubt him in a moment of crisis. The silence between them thickened with each passing day. And in that cold space stood Hermione. She refused to abandon either of them. Every day she walked a tightrope, sitting with Harry in the common room, listening patiently to his frustrations, while also trying to gently reason with Ron, reminding him of all the ways Harry had always shunned attention. As Rowling wrote, Hermione returned to the table with 2 butterbeers and a look of great determination on her face. She was not passive. She was fighting for their friendship, even when they weren't. Hermione didn't take sides. She saw the hurt on both faces. She understood that Ron's jealousy wasn't simple pettiness, but the culmination of years of being in someone else's shadow. She grasped that Harry's isolation wasn't pride, but pain. While others at Hogwarts speculated and whispered, Hermione worked tirelessly to bridge the divide. Even her presence at Harry's side was carefully measured, never rubbing it in Ron's face, never allowing Harry to vent too harshly. Eventually, when Ron's heart softened, Hermione made the reunion seem seamless. She had never let the threads fray. Completely. Her emotional labor went unthanked but was vital. Her influence was perhaps even more crucial during the Horcrux hunt. The trio, now alone and hunted, were subjected to immense psychological strain. The Locket Horcrux fed on their worst insecurities, and for Ron, already insecure and prone to jealousy, it became unbearable. His explosive departure left Harry stunned and betrayed. Yet Hermione's reaction was not rage or blame. She was devastated, yes, but her focus remained on Harry, not in comforting platitudes, but in silent support. She cried, but she stayed. She never stopped moving, planning, or researching. She remained the bridge even when one of its supports had vanished. The emotional intelligence it took to continue speaking of Ron, even lovingly, even through clenched teeth, was immense. She still laid out his blanket at night. She left space in the tent. Her loyalty never waned. It was this unwavering commitment that allowed Ron to return. And when he did, it was Hermione who could have rightfully unleashed her fury. But instead she let her heartbreak rise only momentarily before she allowed herself to forgive. Not for weakness, but because she saw the larger picture. The friendship had to survive if the mission was to succeed. During countless fights between Harry and Ron, whether over Quidditch jealousy, petty arguments, or real emotional rifts, Hermione was always the anchor. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry was consumed by visions and the growing darkness within him, Ron didn't know how to approach him, but Hermione did. She pushed him to speak. She didn't coddle him, but told him the truth. "You're being rather stupid about this, Harry." She didn't allow emotions to fester in silence. She confronted, corrected, and consoled in the right measure. And more importantly, she explained Harry's behavior to Ron when Harry himself couldn't. She translated emotions, diffused tensions, and ensured no one walked too far away. Even in moments where she herself was on the brink of exhaustion, Hermione's instinct was to maintain the group's cohesion. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry became obsessed with Draco's activities, Ron dismissed it as paranoia. The tension rose, yet again Hermione stepped in. She didn't always side with Harry. Sometimes she questioned him. But she did so with care, with clarity. She understood the danger of one-sided loyalty. Her commitment was to truth and unity, not personal pride. This allowed Ron to trust her, even when she disagreed. She made it possible for disagreements to coexist with loyalty, a balance that Harry and Ron struggled to find on their own. There were countless silent moments where Hermione diffused a situation before it erupted. When Ron lashed out in jealousy during Slughorn's party, upset that Hermione had gone with Cormac McLaggen, it was her look, full of hurt but restrained, that stopped Harry from taking sides. She had mastered the art of deflection without denial, of soft confrontation without humiliation. She knew that pushing too hard would drive Ron further away, so she simply walked past him, preserving dignity on both sides. Later, she would explain things to Harry in private, ensuring understanding without blame. In Grimmauld Place, as they prepared for the final stage of their mission, tensions ran high. The pressure, the fear, the isolation, it all bore down on them. And once again, Hermione absorbed more than her share of the emotional weight. When Harry lashed out in grief or frustration, Ron often responded in kind. But Hermione's calm voice, sometimes stern, sometimes soft, cut through the fog. She spoke the truths no one wanted to hear. She reminded them what they were fighting for. She never allowed the emotional chaos to derail their purpose. Her presence was not merely grounding, it was salvational. Even their earliest years hinted at this dynamic. In Philosopher's Stone, after the troll attack, it was Hermione who took the blame, saving Ron and Harry from punishment. That moment was the catalyst for their friendship. It wasn't the bravery of fighting the troll that bonded them, but Hermione's gesture of loyalty. She was the first to truly sacrifice pride for friendship, and from that day forward, she continued to act as the trio's conscience. She called out Harry when he became arrogant. She challenged Ron when he was unfair, but she always did so with love. Their trust in her wasn't blind, but earned. Time and again, she proved herself not just as the smartest in the room, but the most emotionally aware. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she risked her grades and her time-turner to help Buckbeak and Sirius. She juggled impossibilities, not for glory, but because it was right. When Harry felt overwhelmed by revelations about his godfather, it was Hermione who kept him centered. Ron, while loyal, didn't always grasp the emotional nuance. Hermione did. She read between silences. She translated pain into action. There's a reason why Dumbledore trusted Hermione's judgment. Even when she was not the leader of the trio, her influence was the quiet engine behind every movement forward. She reminded Harry to think before acting. She reminded Ron to act before overthinking. She carried the weight of their emotional baggage and still kept moving. Her strength wasn't just in spells or books, but in empathy. She knew that friendships are not built on shared experiences alone, but on the courage to confront, forgive, and mediate. Ron and Harry had many strengths, but self-awareness was not often one of them. Ron was brave, but insecure. Harry was determined, but often reactive. Hermione's gift was recognizing both flaws and accepting them without judgment. She gave them room to grow while guarding the structure of their friendship. Without her, Ron's impulsiveness and Harry's temper might have spiraled into irreconcilable conflict. With her, those flaws became points of growth, not collapse. One of the most powerful proofs of Hermione's role as a mediator came not in grand gestures but in the small daily acts of resilience. She read the room, she made tea after arguments, she passed messages, soothed egos and filled silences with purpose. She knew when to disappear to give space and when to interrupt before things got worse. These are the things that rarely make it into legends but are essential for survival, especially when the world is at war. In the end, it is impossible to imagine the trio without Hermione, not just for her logic, her planning, or her magic, but because she was the bridge, the balance, the unspoken glue. She wasn't just part of the trio, she was the reason the trio remained one. Where Harry and Ron clashed, Hermione connected. Where they doubted, she believed, and where they faltered, she stood, steady, clear-eyed, and endlessly loyal. Number 25, her connection to the Muggle world. Ron Weasley had never seen a television before entering the wizarding world. That simple fact, shared in passing, during one of his early interactions with Harry, was more than a humorous cultural gap. It was a small but telling crack in the wall between the magical and non-magical worlds. Ron was not just unfamiliar with Muggle technology, he was entirely disconnected from the logic, reasoning, and systems that governed the lives of ordinary people. Harry, though raised in the Muggle world, had been shut out from it. The Dursleys kept him in isolation, deprived of any real social, educational, or emotional tools. It was Hermione Granger who bridged that chasm. Not just with knowledge, but with a way of thinking, a worldview, that allowed the trio to move fluidly between two vastly different realities. Without her, Harry and Ron would have been hopelessly ill-equipped to survive outside Hogwarts' enchanted halls. In Deathly Hallows, as the trio prepared to leave the burrow and plunge into a dangerous life on the run, it was Hermione who packed everything essential. She did not just grab books or magical items, she thought of mundane things, like a beaded handbag enchanted with an undetectable extension charm. But more important than the magic itself was the logic behind it. "I've had the essentials packed for days, you know, in case we needed to make a quick getaway," she explained. She included clothes, food, healing potions, and even a sick tent. It was not simply her brilliance in charms that made her invaluable. It was her preparedness, her habit of planning the way any rational Muggle-born child would have been taught to do. Hermione's upbringing gave her more than just practical foresight. It gave her the ability to question the world she had entered. Most witches and wizards accepted magical norms without hesitation, but Hermione applied reason and ethics from the Muggle world. She was the first to challenge the enslavement of house elves, forming SPEW, an initiative that both Harry and Ron found embarrassing. But her outrage came from a different place. Her understanding of fairness, equality, and rights. In the Muggle world, such treatment would have been illegal and immoral. Her perspective challenged the complacency of the wizarding world, and although Harry and Ron were slow to understand, it reshaped their moral compass. When the trio infiltrated the Ministry of Magic in search of the Horcrux locket, their success hinged on Hermione's insight into both magical deception and Muggle behavior. She understood how to impersonate someone in an environment steeped in magical paranoia. She kept calm, navigated bureaucracy, and noticed the details that Harry and Ron missed. The oppressive regime under the Ministry had echoes of historical Muggle dictatorships, something Hermione recognized intuitively. Her ability to spot those parallels enabled her to anticipate threats before they struck. Her Muggle-born status had made her sensitive to prejudice, power abuse, and subtle control, lessons that neither Harry nor Ron, as magical-borns, had been taught. Even earlier, in Half-Blood Prince, her suspicions about the mysterious Prince's Potions book showed how differently she processed information. Harry was enamored by the shortcuts the book provided. Ron admired the results, but Hermione distrusted it. Not out of jealousy, but because she understood the danger of knowledge without context. In the Muggle world, untested formulas and chemical reactions could be fatal. She applied that caution to magic. Her mind worked in hypotheses, risk analysis, and the need for regulation. It was an intellectual discipline that came not from Hogwarts, but from a Muggle education rooted in science and responsibility. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione's mastery of the time turner is another example. Not only did she use it to attend extra classes, but she also demonstrated an uncanny ability to follow strict rules of time travel, rules based on cause and effect, paradoxes, and the responsibility of maintaining temporal integrity. It wasn't just magic, it was reason, it was logic. When she and Harry used it to save both Sirius Black and Buckbeak, their success depended on Hermione's attention to detail and adherence to process. These were skills nurtured in a Muggle household where actions had measurable consequences. During their time in hiding, living in the forest and travelling across England, Hermione's influence became more pronounced. Ron, at one point, abandoned them, unable to bear the discomfort and fear. Harry was brave but unstructured, guided by emotion and impulse. Hermione was the steady current beneath the chaos. She planned their routes, kept track of magical protections, and understood the social dynamics of the world they moved through. In a Muggle town, she knew how to act. She could blend in. Harry and Ron stood out like sore thumbs. She had the instincts of someone who had walked those streets, read those signs, understood the rhythm of everyday life outside the enchanted realm. Her sense of disguise was more than magical glamour. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio hid in the village of Godric's Hollow, Hermione dressed them appropriately, warned them of cultural cues, and insisted on precaution. She knew what a non-magical household would look like, what would draw suspicion, and what behaviors would be seen as out of place. Ron, who once thought an electric kettle was a dark artifact, could never have navigated that. Harry might have tried, but without Hermione's grounding, he would have risked exposure at every turn. Her fluency in both worlds was their shield. The trio's quest was not simply about spells or duels. It was about information, research, understanding. When they searched for the identity of the Deathly Hallows, Hermione turned to books, historical records, and analysis. It was her training in academic rigor, a discipline she brought from the Muggle world, that guided her. Where Ron grew frustrated and Harry impatient, Hermione persisted. She read, underlined, cross-referenced. Her approach was methodical, scientific even. Wizards like Dumbledore valued intuition and symbolism, but Hermione's strength was in documentation and clarity. Even her use of spells reflected her upbringing. She mastered non-verbal magic before most of her peers, not just because she was talented, but because she treated magic as a language, something to be studied, internalized, and used with precision. She learned like a Muggle student through repetition, study, and logic. While Ron relied on instinct and Harry on raw power, Hermione relied on comprehension. It made her not only a better student, but a more adaptable witch in the field. Her connection to the Muggle world also meant she saw the value in tools others ignored. She carried a pen, she understood maps, she knew how to use a mirror for communication long before Sirius gave Harry his enchanted one. In Goblet of Fire, when Rita Skeeter's quill began twisting truths, Hermione quickly understood the media dynamic, something deeply familiar in Muggle culture. She fought back not just with magic, but with strategy. She captured Skeeter in her beetle animagus form and blackmailed her into silence. It was not cruelty, it was tactical thinking, born of a world where cunning and accountability went hand in hand. Perhaps the most subtle example of her Muggle-born advantage came when she modified her parents' memories to protect them. The spell itself was magical, but the decision was steeped in a Muggle understanding of danger, sacrifice, and long-term consequence. It was not a dramatic duel, but it was one of the most powerful acts in the entire series. She erased herself from their lives to save them, something neither Ron nor Harry could have fully grasped. She did not wait for Dumbledore's permission or ministry guidance. She made a decision as a daughter, as a strategist, and as someone who knew what war in the real world required. Even in emotional matters, Hermione often acted with a Muggle-born sense of responsibility. She valued communication, honesty, and commitment. When Ron abandoned them during their mission, she didn't simply react with tears. She was devastated, but she continued. She understood abandonment in a different context. She knew that life did not pause for grief. Harry admired her resolve, but even he didn't fully comprehend its source. Hermione had been raised in a world where resilience was learned, not bestowed by magical bloodlines. Her adaptability also made her a better friend. She did not simply support Harry and Ron, she challenged them, she made them think, she introduced them to ideas outside of magic, like the concept of justice that wasn't determined by blood status or magical skill. She shaped their worldview, often without them realizing it. In their moments of greatest danger, her presence was not just reassuring, it was transformative. Hermione Granger's greatest power was never her wand or her intellect alone. It was the lens through which she saw the world, a lens shaped by the logic, ethics, and complexity of Muggle life. Without it, Harry and Ron would have stumbled in darkness. With it, they walked through fire and survived. Number 26, Understanding the Cost of Sacrifice. There were many reasons why Harry Potter became the boy who lived, and why Ron Weasley stood by his side in every battle, from the Chamber of Secrets to the Battle of Hogwarts. But beneath the headlines of heroism and loyalty lies a quieter truth, one that is often overshadowed by action scenes and wand duels. Hermione Granger was the reason they kept moving forward. She wasn't just the cleverest witch of her age. She was their compass, the soul of their trio, the one who understood what Harry couldn't bring himself to say and what Ron refused to confront. While the boys were often driven by emotion and impulse, Hermione brought the painful but necessary understanding that some victories are paid for in sacrifice. When Sirius Black fell through the veil, Harry was broken. The image of his godfather disappearing into nothingness haunted him. He blamed himself for being reckless, for being lured into the trap at the Department of Mysteries, for believing what he so desperately wanted to believe. But Hermione didn't let grief paralyze them. She held on to the truth that they were at war, that Sirius made his choice, and that grieving him could not mean abandoning the fight. While Harry spiraled into silence and self-loathing, Hermione kept reading, researching, preparing. It was her refusal to collapse that reminded them all that there was still a war to win. She told Harry, "We're with you, whatever happens," not to comfort him, but to anchor him. Grief, she knew, was a wave. But action could keep them afloat. Hermione never glamorized sacrifice. She didn't throw herself into danger for attention or glory. Her understanding of sacrifice was deeply personal. She obliterated her own parents' memories to protect them, a silent, brutal act of love. She did it alone, without applause or recognition, knowing they might never forgive her if the spell was undone. Ron could never have made such a choice. Harry, brave as he was, would have hesitated, but Hermione understood that some sacrifices were invisible, not spoken about, not praised, only endured. It was that steel in her that kept her moving forward, even when the world felt like it was falling apart. When Harry hesitated to enter the Forbidden Forest, knowing it was a walk to his death, it was Hermione's presence earlier that made that choice possible. She had taught him time and time again that doing what is right is not the same as doing what is easy. From the first year, when she reminded them that breaking rules meant nothing unless they were for something greater, Hermione had already planted the seeds of moral clarity. Dumbledore's words, "We must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy," could have been said by her, and indeed she had lived by them long before the quote was spoken aloud. Ron was loyal and brave, but he struggled with insecurity. Jealousy poisoned his judgment more than once. In the Triwizard tournament, he believed Harry had entered without telling him. In the Horcrux hunt, he abandoned them in the woods. Ron loved his friends, but he lacked the emotional discipline to process loss, fear, and uncertainty. Hermione, by contrast, didn't flinch. She cried yes. She suffered, but she never left. Even when Ron slammed the door and disapparated into the cold night, she stayed, not out of obligation, but because she believed that running from pain only gave pain more power. It was in the tent, surrounded by cold winds and hopelessness, that Hermione's inner strength became most visible. She kept the Locket Horcrux at bay, took watch while Harry slept, and never stopped searching for clues, for hope, for a plan. She wasn't just a clever strategist, she was a stabilizer. She reminded Harry that people had died, yes, but not for them to sit in despair. Dobby died saving them, Mad Eye fell in battle. They owed it to the dead not to mourn forever, but to finish the mission. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Hermione gave meaning to death by making sure it wasn't for nothing. She understood the cost of every life lost. When Lavender Brown was mauled in the Battle of Hogwarts, when Fred Weasley's laughter was silenced, when Tonks and Lupin died side by side, Hermione felt every wound, but she never let that pain harden into cynicism. Instead, she became more determined, more focused. She didn't romanticize martyrdom. She simply accepted that the path to peace would be paved with losses. Not all of them fair, not all of them deserved, but all of them necessary. In the Ministry of Magic, when she used the Polyjuice potion to impersonate Mafalda Hopkirk, it wasn't just a brilliant bit of magic. It was risk, it was danger, and she faced it without flinching. She knew they might be caught, tortured, killed, and still she went. When Harry hesitated to use the unforgivable curses, it was Hermione who reminded him that war changes rules. Morality isn't abandoned, but it must bend in the face of evil. She didn't take joy in that fact, but she accepted it. Harry would never have made it through those moments without her ability to face reality as it was, not as they wished it to be. Her understanding of sacrifice extended to the way she treated people. She didn't pity Neville, she encouraged him. She respected Luna even when others mocked her. She stood up for house elves when no one else did, knowing it would bring her ridicule. That was the essence of Hermione, conviction without applause. She believed in justice even when it was inconvenient, even when it cost her friendships or popularity. She was the moral backbone of the group. And without her, Harry and Ron might have drifted into anger or despair. The night they infiltrated Gringotts, Hermione again put herself at risk. Transfigured into Bellatrix, she had to channel someone she despised. The danger wasn't just magical, it was psychological. She had to think like a Death Eater, mimic her cruelty, walk into the lair of dragons and curses. She never asked for credit. She did what needed to be done. And it was that repeated willingness to act, not recklessly but bravely, that kept their mission alive. Even in her moments of fear, Hermione showed clarity. When Snape killed Dumbledore and Hogwarts fell under the control of the Carrows, she didn't collapse into panic. She read, she researched, she laid plans. She became the strategist Harry needed, because Hermione never mistook emotion for weakness. She allowed herself to feel, but never let feelings decide her course. That made her invaluable, not only as a friend, but as a leader. Harry often carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He believed that every death was his fault. Cedric, Sirius, even Dobby. But Hermione reminded him, in every moment, that guilt could not be their compass. She didn't minimize loss. She contextualized it. She whispered the wisdom that pain was not the enemy, surrender was. And that wisdom saved Harry more than once. Ron, though brave, would have faltered in a world without Hermione. He needed her logic when emotions clouded his vision. He needed her foresight when danger was ahead. In the Department of Mysteries, when brains attacked him, it was Hermione who had warned them not to rush in. In The Half-Blood Prince, when the poisoned mead nearly killed Ron, it was Hermione who pieced together Slughorn's motives and timeline. Again and again she saw what others didn't. And that insight wasn't just intelligence, it was intuition shaped by sacrifice. When the final battle came, and they stood in the ruins of Hogwarts, it was Hermione who cast protective spells around the injured, who guided students into the room of requirement, who thought ahead when everyone else reacted. She didn't raise her wand to be noticed. She raised it because someone had to. And in that chaos her calm was a lighthouse. Without her, Harry and Ron would have had courage, but no direction. The truth is, Harry and Ron were the heart and fists of the story, but Hermione was the spine. Her understanding of sacrifice, not as a singular moment but as a way of life, gave their journey structure. It was she who reminded them that courage without wisdom is recklessness, and grief without purpose is paralysis. And in every dark hour it was her light that burned steady, guiding them not just toward victory, but toward becoming the men they were meant to be. Number 27, the only one who dared to disagree with Harry. In their very first year at Hogwarts, when Harry and Ron foolishly decided to sneak out to duel Draco Malfoy at midnight, Hermione tried to stop them. She told them it was a terrible idea, reminded them about the school rules, and physically followed them to the tower in an attempt to talk sense into them. Of course, the boys didn't listen. They dragged her into trouble anyway, but that moment was the first of many where Hermione refused to stay silent in the face of recklessness. Unlike many others, she didn't treat Harry as a chosen icon beyond criticism. She treated him as a friend, flawed, fallible, and very much in need of someone to keep him grounded. She wasn't afraid to say no, even when Harry believed yes was the only answer. Throughout the years, Hermione's opposition to Harry's impulsiveness became not only a hallmark of their friendship, but a quiet lifeline. While Ron was loyal to the end, often following Harry into danger with blind faith, Hermione offered something more powerful: resistance. Her strength lay not only in her intelligence, but in her willingness to challenge. When the time came in Goblet of Fire for Harry to face his first Triwizard task, stealing an egg from a dragon. It wasn't Ron who helped him prepare. Ron was sulking. It was Hermione who stood by him. And yet, when she believed Harry had gone too far or was acting rashly, she said so. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry grew obsessed with using the Cruciatus curse on Bellatrix Lestrange, Hermione looked at him not with admiration, but with concern. She reminded him who he was. The honesty that Hermione brought to their friendship wasn't a minor quality. It defined their survival. Take Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry was determined to kill Sirius Black after believing he'd betrayed his parents. Hermione didn't join his crusade. She pleaded for him to consider reason, warning him not to act out of vengeance. Even when Harry ignored her, she didn't retreat into silence or loyalty for loyalty's sake. She watched, she questioned, and when the truth about Sirius came to light, her initial doubts served as a sobering reminder. Harry's instincts, though brave, were not always right. It was Hermione's voice, again and again, that stood as the moral compass. There were few people in Harry's world who dared to correct him. From Dobby the house elf to Cornelius Fudge, people either idolized him or despised him. Even Dumbledore, the man who should have offered firm guidance, often kept Harry in the dark for the sake of grand plans. But Hermione was different. She didn't see Harry as a myth. She saw him as a boy, and later as a teenager, struggling with enormous weight. She treated his choices with respect, but never gave them blind approval. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry became obsessed with Draco's behavior and believed he was up to something sinister, Hermione refused to indulge his theory. "You're obsessed, Harry," she told him, with quiet concern. She challenged his assumptions, and though Harry was eventually proven right, it was the tension between them that highlighted how much Hermione truly cared. She didn't want him to be right if it meant more danger. She would rather him be wrong and safe. Ron was Harry's brother-in-arms, his mirror of loyalty, but Hermione was his anchor. While Ron offered comfort and companionship, Hermione offered course correction. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry decided during a cold and desperate winter to return to Godric's Hollow on the vague hope of finding something useful, Hermione didn't leap to agree. She hesitated, questioned, and reluctantly went along, not because she believed in the plan, but because she believed in Harry. Her readiness to argue was not disloyalty, it was the highest form of loyalty, loving someone enough to tell them when they're wrong and following them even when you don't agree. Her interventions weren't just emotional. Hermione was often the one who prevented disaster by refusing to accept Harry's gut feelings as absolute. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry had a vision of Sirius being tortured at the Ministry of Magic, he was determined to rush in without thinking. It was Hermione who pointed out that Voldemort could be planting false visions in Harry's mind, that it could be a trap. Harry, too consumed by fear, ignored her. The consequences were deadly. Sirius died. But Hermione had been right, and it was perhaps one of the most tragic examples of what could happen when her warnings were brushed aside. Hermione never resented Harry for being the chosen one, but she also never worshipped him for it. She was the only one in his immediate circle who maintained that healthy distance between admiration and caution. When Harry became consumed by his growing powers and his role in the war, Hermione's words remained sharp and honest. "You're not invincible, Harry," she said once. "You're human." It was not cruelty. It was grace. It was the reminder Harry desperately needed in a world that often forgot he was just a boy, burdened with impossible tasks.